Okay, let me know if you want to just follow my camera because I just put the PowerPoint there. But if you want me to send it to you so you can follow along on a separate screen, I can do that too. So just if somebody gives me some feedback, let me know. You know what? I'll just do that. Give me. Okay. You should have a link to my PowerPoint, so hopefully you can just open that up on a separate sheet, browser, and then we can start. Okay, so we're going to talk about how to conquer your interviews. Okay, it's there's gonna be a handful of questions that they ask. It's gonna be pretty quick per person. You know, you might have two or three different interviewers, but each interview might be like 15-20 minutes long, and they will probably ask a lot of overlapping questions, which I'll go over some of the most important ones. Um, you should be ready. Okay, be prepared for a lot of these questions, and you should part of it's going to be rehearsed, but at the end of practicing, it should come off naturally. Okay, so you should have whatever answers that you've rehearsed or thought of, they should come off as genuinely as possible. Okay, so if and when you get to this point where somebody interviews you, they've probably not they've gone beyond your portfolio, beyond your resume. Okay, so it's going to be about who you are as a person and if you fit well within their structure. Okay, if you fit well within their team, you're not a crazy person. That's kind of what they're looking for. Okay, so you really want to show your best self. Okay, you're gonna be It's gonna be nerve wracking. You're gonna be anxious. Like I said, practice makes perfect. So the more times you work on these questions that I'm gonna go through, the more effortless it's going to become when you actually are asked them during those interviews. Okay. First and foremost, you should know about your program. Okay, you should know I've been there before. You know, we apply broadly, and you apply to a lot of different programs. The ones that you've gotten interviews on, you should know them through and through. So you can go on Frida, Residency Explorer, ACGME website. They have a link to um, their website. They usually keep it up to date for the most part and tell you a little bit about that program. You'll notice that for the particular specialty that you're applying to, there will be a lot of overlap of the things that they're proud of. So you got to find things that are very special about each and every one of those programs. So, for example, you should know any advancements that they've made. So, if they, I was talking to my residency, and the program director had incorporated ultrasound. So, I'm internal medicine. Having ultrasound training as a resident is amazing, and I wish I had that. And that's one thing that, if you know something that's new about that program, you want to be able to highlight that during your interview. Like, hey, I noticed that you love ultrasound and you train your residents. It shows just from that little amount of information. It shows that you've done the research and that it's very thoughtful, right? Like, it's not going to be something like, oh, I want to come to your program because I like academic setting. If it's too generic, it's not going to work. Okay, so know a little bit about those programs and how they align with your own goals. Okay. Sorry, so Sienna's saying these are locked. Okay, let's see. Before I keep going, I don't know how to unlock it. Anybody have any idea? I'm on Google Slides, but I just sent a link. Hmm. The other thing that I can do is send you a link through the whiteboard app that I use. But let me know if you can help me figure out, because I usually just share it through here. Let me see if this works. Oh, it's restricted. Maybe that's why. Okay, that should work now, Sienna. Let me know if that works. Okay,
Yeah, I just tried. It works now. Thank you.
awesome. Thank you. All right. So first and foremost, know about your program. Okay, let's practice this. I want to really like. I want to see who's alive over there because I don't know if like it's hard to hear um, who's paying attention or not. So let's just do a practice for the next 30 seconds. I want you to think about, and if you feel comfortable rehearsing, this is a perfect time to try it with me. I want you to tell me about yourself. That's going to be a very common question. So think about that question for the next 30 seconds. So as I'm talking about it a little bit more, think about how you're going to formulate that question. So when somebody says, "Tell me about yourself," what is it? What are the qualities that you want to highlight? Okay. It may be about your personality, it may be about hobbies, it may be about your love for medicine, something specific about medicine. So think about that question because you are going to get that question without a doubt. They're going to ask you, "Tell me about yourself." And if anybody wants to give it a shot, this is the perfect time to do it, like I said. So again, you will get this question. Do not forget it. You should practice that response because you're going to be asked that question by many, many people, right? So I know I understand that a majority of interviews are remote, but if you do decide to go to a physical interview like in person or to some of these social events, you are going to be asked about that. So think about it in that context that you may be at a party and you're meeting a friend of a friend and they're not like your friend, right? So it's got to be a little bit professional, but you still have to feel like it has to be personable. It can't be so robotic. It can't just be about you and being a physician and being in that specialty. It's got to be a little bit about who you are, where you're from, what your values are, and then a little bit about medicine as well. Okay, if nobody wants to try it, that's fine. We can move on. So, why are you interested in our residency program? Okay, so not only do you, like I was alluding to, you need to know about the program, but they're going to ask you this question. So, like, what do you know about our program? Why do you want to come to our program? Um, is there anything about our program? They might ask you in like indirect ways to see if you actually researched their program. Is there anything about our program that you like, or would you want to improve on, or do you have any suggestions? What would you bring to the table to our program? What kind of skill set would you bring to our program? So they'll ask different ways to see like what is it that, like, again, it should be thoughtful, right? If you didn't research that program and you say something generic, they will notice, right? So think about that. We'll talk about describing a difficult situation. So that situation might be medical. So it might be like describe a difficult patient that you had to deal with. It might be teamwork based. So describe a teammate that you worked with, a colleague that you worked with that was difficult. They might ask you qualities that are difficult to work with. Like, what are qualities that you've noticed about other people that are difficult to work around? And sometimes it feels like a trap. So you want to be, again, very thoughtful in your approach. So it should be not a completely negative stab towards somebody, right? Or jab towards somebody. It should be like something that you took that was negative, but you turned it into a positive, right? They want to see how you grew from these experiences. So be very. Again, that's a guaranteed question that they're going to ask you. Is they're going to tell me a difficult case, tell me a difficult patient. Um, what are some what are some medical problems that you see as difficult, right? So that's what I mean by a trap. They might tell you, you might feel like saying something like, "Oh, pain seeking or malingering or something like that," and the answer doesn't end there. The answer doesn't end with just saying what diseases you find difficult. You should propose a solution or showcase your skills, highlighting a case that showcased your skills coming towards a solution, right? Like you had a difficult patient who was non-compliant, and if you just end it there and you didn't realize maybe they can't afford the medication that you prescribed and that's why they're non-compliant, and then you sat down with them and try to figure out through different mediums on how to get affordable care, right? Using good RX or talking to insurance or talking to a social worker in your hospital, something like that, right? Have a story and be able to tell that story um, effortlessly. Okay, that's what I mean. Like you have to rehearse it to some degree, and that brings me up to a point. Don't don't ramble on. Okay, I'm gonna tell you guys this later, but I highly recommend that you record yourself, even if it's just your like an audio recording, uh, preferably a video recording, because you want to see how your nonverbals come off on the screen, especially if you're doing remote interviews. You want to be able to have a concise answer for things. I've sat at interviews for medical school for medical students, and it's a lot of the same thing. But if a student, prospective student, is rambling on, then we can only ask like two or three questions in that short period of time. But if you give concise answers and it feels like this back and forth that's going on, more um, natural, organic, then you get your interviewer involved in asking more questions, and they remember you better. Okay. Be prepared for your own questions. Again, you need to do research on your programs. I can't stress this enough. If you go to programs, and I've made this mistake before. That's why I'm telling you guys this. I've gone to programs where you'll see all your interviews are going to be like not back to back, but sometimes they might be like sometimes you might have multiple interviews in a week. You may be just focusing on the next one, the next one, the next one, and the next one comes too soon, and you didn't get time to research that program, and you're gonna get in there just trying to like kind of fake it till you make it. I'm telling you, a lot of programs will notice this. If you don't have questions to ask, they're going to ask you this. They're going to say, "What kind of questions do you have for our program?" Okay, what questions do you have for our program? So questions for our program. Sorry for my handwriting; it's terrible. Okay, so, questions for our program. Again, if you did your research, this would be a great place to ask those questions. They will ask them usually at the end of the interview. Okay. And being on the other side of it, having had interviewed students, I understand why we ask that question and why residencies ask that question. Again, it's to see if you actually have anything thoughtful and memorable to share with the program. They want to bring people not to just train and like move on. They want people to like have memorable contributions to their program. Okay, so some questions might be like, what kind of teaching opportunities do you have? What kind of leadership opportunities do you have? If you love procedures and you want to ask about a specific procedure, for me, maybe like for internal medicine, it would have been like, hey, how's uh, who does central lines in your hospital? If you have multiple subspecialties like fellowship programs, you have to be mindful of this because if you are in a general residency like internal medicine, you may have specialists like fellows like critical care and EM and other like surgery who might be taking your procedures away. So you want to know that, right? If that's something that you care about. If you care about teaching, if something like academics is something important to you, ask about what are your academic opportunities. So you might be able to ask something like, do you have like a teaching track? Sometimes they have rotations set up for you so that if you are planning to be in academics in the future, they might prepare you for that versus just having a generic residency. Okay. Either way, if you can get those questions answered through the website, probably don't need to answer those questions or ask those same questions, right? Especially like I said, these people like the program director, associate program directors, they work hard to try to keep their websites up to date, to try to showcase their program to the world. And so if you ask a question that was already easily searchable on their website, they might be like kind of turned off from that. Okay, so just be mindful of that. Okay, practice makes perfect. So practice, practice, practice. I highly recommend if you don't want to, if you don't decide to want to work with me personally, work with each other. Like find another classmate, find a family member, find um, somebody who can pretend to be the interviewer. That can see it from their perspective, how you're portraying yourself. Okay, and so um, again, practice by recording yourself because you'll be surprised how much information you get when you record yourself and you see things like saying or not looking at the camera. I'll talk a little bit about how to do well on a remote setting, like little things that we all take for granted. Uh, be mindful of that. Like I said, practice makes perfect. Okay, Practice answering questions clearly and concisely. That's, again, it's really hard to master that. So me telling you this passively, it's not automatically going to make you a rock star in your interview. You have to practice. And you might notice, like I said, when you go back and look at your recordings, you might notice like, hey, this answer that I just thought of, um, it's too bloaty. I'm going around in circles and I can't keep track of what is it that I was trying to say. Okay. Uh, Dan says, "What should you do when their program website hasn't been updated since 2021?" So that's a limitation, right? So if their website is not up to date, sometimes they have their Instagram account that might be up to date. You can see things like what type of social gatherings they've done over the last few years, right? Like just try to scrape at anything and everything. So it doesn't have to be just medical advancements that they made. Like I said, for example, that ultrasound training that they added for my residency. It could be social, like what kind of social things do you do? And this might be more of a question to ask for like residents if you ever get interviewed by residents or if you talk to residents like in a social context. But yeah, I mean, you're kind of limited, right? So you try to find it, scrape through the internet, go on Reddit, whatever, if you can find it. If it, you know, try to stick to the websites, try to stick to their official accounts, and, and talk to people who have rotated there. If you know people there, that's all much more reliable information. Okay.
Can I ask a further question for that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no. So kind of on that line. So for example, that's like a Missouri program I was trying to research. So I don't know if that in my mind, I think that looks kind of sloppy. But I feel like if I asked a question similar to that and mentioned that, I feel like that may come across as me critiquing the program, which it kind of is. That also reminds me too. So like how, so when they ask like follow-up questions about the program, should you be asking kind of more like hardball questions? So for like Olympia Fields, like they're accredited with a warning right now. Is that a good, would you think like that's a good time to ask about the accreditation warning or like what's been going on with that?
Yeah, hardball questions like that might be a little bit tricky because you don't want to come off, you know, not insulting the program, but criticizing a program. So it might be something if it's done tastefully, it might be something that you can do. But if you can't formulate a good question, with again practice, right? See when you talk to if you talk to your partner when you're practicing interviews, and it comes off insincere or disrespectful, I probably would avoid it. I mean, the chances are it's probably going to come off disrespectful, like the website thing, right? If the website's outdated, honestly, who cares, right? Like that's if you're interested in that program, you'll figure that out as you go through your interview. But like I said, I mean, there's no point in mentioning like, oh, your website's outdated, because then what are they going to say back, right? Like they're probably going to be like, okay, thank you. Like there's not much more beyond that conversation. So same thing, with the ACGME thing. That the way that I think about it, if you say it tastefully, it might be something like, are you able to elaborate on it? They may even bring it up because it's public information. You can look up on ACGME's website for any one of these programs and see their history of accreditation. If they've been warned, if they've lost privileges and had to regain them, you'll get that information pretty easily. So again, I don't know. Like my gut tells me like be careful about. It's not like a very simple like, hey, yeah, ask the question. You can rub people the wrong way. So does that help? Okay. Okay. So dress professionally. So I say like, you know again, practice makes perfect, and some people feel a certain way when they're dressed up, right? So maybe your confidence comes up when you're wearing something nice. So even when you're practicing, I would recommend that you get into that mindset. So not just wearing like your pajamas or something when you're practicing. Like you should feel it, right? Like imagine how long it might take for you if you haven't tied a tie in a while, or get your blazer, make sure it fits, and make sure it's clean. If you have to go take it to the dry cleaners or something like that, right? All that stuff is you don't want to wait till the last second. So might as well start practicing that stuff now. So I say just practice dressing up professionally when you're practicing your interview skills, and you'll be surprised, right? Like if you don't do that and then you do it only during the interviews, you might miss something. Maybe there's a stain on your shirt. Maybe it's fitting differently. Maybe it's too tight. Maybe it's too wrinkled. All these little things matter. I'm telling you, when you're interviewing somebody from like through a screen, you have such little to go by versus in person. So if you can optimize those things, it's beneficial for you. Okay. Like I said, stay calm, stay confident, take deep breaths, try to maintain eye contact. So it's kind of hard when you're doing this remotely, but try to like aim for the upper part of your screen. So I'll tell you about like different like remote techniques when you're doing interviews online. Like when I'm trying to talk to you guys, I try to put your like your window, like your face closer to the camera so it feels more natural. Versus if I put it on my other screen here and I'm looking like this, it's not gonna, like, for somebody who's viewing me, it's not gonna look like we're making a connection. Okay, so you want to again try to optimize everything, maintain good eye contact, and remember they want to get to know you as a person. If you've made it this far, you know, forget about your board scores. I mean, that stuff is there, right? But they're not going to ask you about it. They're going to, again, if they've interviewed you, if they've offered an interview for you, they really want to know who you are as a person. Not like, you don't have to keep highlighting your resume, your experiences. Those that thing, like, you can expand on those things, right? You can expand on them, but I wouldn't sit like be like harping on an amazing board score or whatever, right? Like that's not what they're interviewing for. Okay. Okay, better late than never, right? Audition rotations. If you have already done some, that's fine. But if you haven't, and you're actively in one, audition, sub-I, anything that you're interested in that program, you got to come early, stay late, and be proactive. Okay, so that means don't wait for them to tell you to do something. Offer to do more. Okay, see more patients. If they say like, hey, on average, you're typically seeing 3 patients on your sub-I or 5 patients on your sub-I, ask for more, even if it's 1 or 2 extra patients. And it makes a difference, right? Because you're challenging yourself. They see that you're challenging yourself, even if you struggle a little bit and you don't look perfect. Um, that is impressive to someone who's watching you. Okay. So offer to take on responsibilities. I would recommend even like, it's quote unquote scut work type of stuff. Like if you can write a note for someone, if you can call somebody like a consultant, if you can call family, if you can talk to the nurse, if you can talk to social worker, if you could do something to be an integral part of the team, do it. Okay. I'm telling you, I see so many students. The average student is passive. The average student sits in the corner and waits to be told what to do. And that's not what they're looking for. They want you to be proactive. Okay. Build positive relationships. Let people know who you are personally, right? So you're not just there to do well professionally, but if there's opportunities to talk about your life and learn about other people's lives, the residents that you're working with, the attendings that you're working with, heck, it doesn't matter. Whoever you're interacting with, it could be the janitor, it could be the social worker, it could be the nurse. Everybody talks. So if you are interacting with someone, make it meaningful. Okay. Work on your small talk. Okay. Don't and please do not talk about other people. This is like, we'll talk about the do's and don'ts, but let it be neutral or positive type of interactions. Okay. So this is my remote interview tips. So if you do have opportunities to go in person, please go. Like especially if it's one of your top programs, even if it's like you got to take a flight or drive or take a hotel in the middle of the night. I had to do that for all of my programs. There was no remote option. This is all like post COVID, right? That this has changed. But I think some programs still are offering personal interviews or giving you the option, right? Like you can do personal or remote. I would say if you can go, especially if it's a program that's in your top 15. If it's there's social events, I also recommend trying to go, especially if it's in your top. Do what you can, but like you might meet residents there, and they say that it doesn't influence their like who they choose or who they match. But even if it does or doesn't, who cares? Like you can get much more information through these social gatherings. So you can talk more like to residents who are going to be much more chill. You might be able to connect with people who came from CCOM or from your school, whatever. So when it comes to remote interviews, again, this is the stuff that we take for granted. Please find a quiet and well lit space. Okay, I'm telling you, how many times have I seen it where people are sitting in like public settings where it's super loud and people are walking past them? It's distracting, especially for the interviewer. It's distracting. So our school, Midwestern, check with Sandy McFarland, but I think they're reserving spots. If you can't find a spot, like maybe you live in a place that's loud, you can reserve a spot at the library on campus or some rooms on campus that they'll try to reserve for quiet time. Okay. Make sure you test your equipment. Okay. Your laptop, your camera, your mic. Okay. All that stuff should be working. Make sure that your settings are all on point. I mean, I'm constantly always having to change it because, whatever, like my default settings keep going back to some other thing. So make sure that you have all of that ready to go. Okay. Um, Make sure your internet. You'd be surprised how many times internet drops out. So make sure your internet is all good to go. You tested it. Maybe even like do some testing on it. Some of these apps, depending on what kind of router or modem you have, you can go and test it, make sure everything is working fine. Even like if you wanted to like just reinsure that it's working, unplug it, plug it back in if it's been a long time, just to let it reset. Maintain good posture and good eye contact while you're looking into the camera. Okay, so if you are slouching, if you're like off center a little bit, if you're too close up, right? Like all these things matter. So make sure you are encompassing your camera. Make sure that you have good posture. Make sure you're smiling all the time. Make sure that you're looking at the camera whenever you're trying to answer their questions. Okay, and like I was telling you before, dress professionally. Even if it's remote, dress professionally. Okay. Some of the do's and don'ts: smile. Okay, you'd be surprised a lot. I mean, when you're nervous, but if you smile more, anything that you say may come more off like more naturally. Your confidence might grow with it. So just trying to, it's almost like kind of fake it till you make it, and show genuine interest. Okay, so like I said, if you do a lot of good research for the programs that you're interviewing at, it will come off more genuine and less generic. Okay, ask thoughtful questions and be yourself. Okay, please don't discuss any like polarizing topics, politics, religion. Don't talk about other people. So I've noticed some students who do this where like they use polarizing language, especially when they're nervous. Maybe like saying the word stupid, right? Like even if you say it jokingly, like, oh, that thing was so stupid, or I felt so, so dumb or crazy. If you say anything that may come off as like polarizing, don't use those words. Okay, try to keep it as neutral as possible or positive. And it's gonna come off scripted if you don't practice. It will come off scripted if you don't practice. So that means I can tell the difference between somebody who has practiced one time or no times and somebody who's practiced so much or has worked really hard on that, like showcasing their personality, and it comes off much more genuine. So please try to avoid it being robotic. You have to rehearse some of your answers. That's part of the game, right? You have to rehearse some of your answers and be ready for a lot of those questions that I mentioned. Just make sure that there's a little bit of that added, genuine, meaningful approach to it. Okay. Okay, some different types of categories for questions. So tell me about yourself. I don't know how you felt thinking about it. It's not an easy question to answer. Okay. They're going to want to know who you are. And I can argue that there's no right or wrong answer. There are worse answers and there are better answers. Okay. So this has to be a little bit about you as a person. It could be like, hey, my name is Sean. I'm from Chicago. I grew up in a family of, some little interesting factoids about you. I grew up in a family of 5 siblings, and I love sports. But it can't be too much of that, right? It has to come back to medicine in some form. Okay, so I took care of, my dad has diabetes, and I got really interested in internal medicine because of that. Something, right? Like just find this is basically your elevator pitch. Okay, so if you have 15 or 20 seconds with the program director in the same elevator as you, what are you going to say? That's basically what tell me about yourself is. Why did you choose this specialty? So whatever specialty is, if it's internal medicine, if it's surgery, if it's anesthesia, if it's EM, who cares? you need to know why you're doing this. Okay, you got to showcase it too. You got to be excited about it. You got to be passionate about it. Okay, you want to share that excitement with someone, and it should come off that way. You will be asked, like, maybe not your strengths. They might ask your strengths, but and they don't do this as much anymore. They don't ask directly, so they won't ask directly like what are your weaknesses, but they're gonna ask you in these different ways, like these difficult situations. Okay, so they're gonna ask you difficult situations, basically to see how your weaknesses have evolved. Okay, or have you do you have introspection on those weaknesses, right? Because if you had gotten to a fight with one of your colleagues, did you just let it go, or did you work through it, or did you um, never speak to that person again, right? Like there's got to be growth, and they want to see that weakness evolve into a positive. Okay, share personal stories. Again, if it's too generic and it's not personal, then they're not going to remember you. So the way that they'll ask it, and I already alluded to this, is tell me about a difficult patient case and what did you learn? Okay, so have something ready. Have a couple of stories ready, like 2 or 3 stories of interesting patients that you've seen on your rotations, preferably in that specialty, where something was difficult, right? Like it might be something where it's a difficult, maybe the complexity of the medicine was difficult. It could be that the patient was difficult in some form. It could be that family was difficult. It could have been like the situation was difficult, right? Like if you are going into pediatrics and you see, sick kid and family's not around or something like that, right? Like you gotta find 2 or 3 stories, I would say, and start practicing them on each other, or um, like record yourself while you're doing it and see how it comes off. How do you approach diagnosing a complicated patient? So they may ask you that, or they may ask like, tell me about an interesting patient. They might just keep it general, and usually more broad-based type of questions start in the beginning. So tell me about yourself. Why this specialty? Tell me some interesting patient in that specialty that you saw. It's gonna be, for the most of you, depending on the specialty that you're applying to, it's gonna feel comfortable, like surprisingly. Like that's you're gonna have a good time. They're gonna ask you a lot of questions about you. They're interested in you. So it kind of has a good feeling to it. Just always be ready for some of these more tougher type of questions. Okay. Program specific. Again, I can't highlight this enough. You need to know your program. Okay. If you've talked to me before, I always equate this to like dating. So if you were getting to know someone, you should try to get to know them, right? Um, do your research, and make sure that you know what your program's strengths are. Make sure that you know any new advancements they've made, okay, academically. If they're doing research in a different way, if they're training their residents in a different way, anything, you got to find something, like 2 or 3 things about that program that you really appreciate. So why do you want to join our program? This will also be like city specific. So if they notice that you're not from the area, again, it might not be direct. It may not be like, hey, why do you want to come to Missouri? Why do you want to come to Florida? Regardless, be ready for something like that. Be ready for something like that. Maybe you have family in those areas. Maybe you've traveled in that area before. Maybe you love that area for its nature, or for its outdoors activities, or whatever, right? Have a thoughtful answer when it comes to the city itself. Maybe the area that you're going to is one of those 3 categories of regions. Maybe it's suburban, urban, or rural, and that's something that you love. Maybe you want to go to a rural area and you want to practice rural medicine. Have something thoughtful about something connected to not just the program itself, but the geographical region that you're applying to. They're going to ask like, what can you bring? What are you looking for? They want to see, again, thoughtful answers. Leadership. So they're going to ask you again, how did you handle conflict? So how did you handle a tough teammate? Were you in any leadership roles? Tell me an interesting experience that you had. How did you grow? They want to see how you grew from those experiences. So again, I had a lot of questions for when you guys are signing up for this. how to handle these behavioral type of questions. And again, it's not just um, saying the negatives about something, because if you just complain about it and that's the end of the conversation, then you didn't learn anything from it. At least you didn't demonstrate that you learned something from it. They want to know that you grew from it, you evolved from it, you were able to handle it professionally, because that type of stuff is going to happen in residency, right? You're gonna butt heads with certain residents, you're gonna butt heads with certain attendings. They want to know that you can work within a team, and you should be able to demonstrate that on an interview. Okay. So, how do you develop rapport with your patients? How do you work within a team? These are like a little bit less like lower yield type of questions, but again, just still be ready for it. They're just trying to figure out again, how do you communicate? Do you communicate effectively? What type of forms of communication do you use? Are you are you using unassuming approach, or are you judging? Like for example, if one of your colleagues is coming late every 5 minutes, how do you handle that type of person? Right? They might ask you a question like that. You know, do you just go directly at them and accuse them, or do you try to figure it out, and try to understand in a more sensitive approach of like why that person's coming late? Because you know they want to know that, hey, this colleague of yours may be late because they have a kid and they have to keep dropping that kid off to daycare, and the daycare only opens at this particular time, and that's why they're always late. So like knowing that information, or how you got that information, and not assuming and all that stuff, right? So this is all important. Personal growth, how you learn and adapt. So this is a good question. So have you highlight a time that you received corrective feedback and you improved? Okay. So again, this is just growth. How do you handle critique? How do you handle criticism? Do you have thick skin? Are you sensitive to it? They're going to see that if you don't know how to respond to this question. So again, have a thoughtful response. Somebody stepped you to the side, one of your attendings or a resident, and told you that you missed this thing, and you took it wholeheartedly, and you worked on it, and you improved throughout that rotation and became better because of it, right? They don't want to see something like, oh, that doctor was so mean, he was like criticizing me left and right, I hated that doc. They don't want to hear that response, right? You want to hear something that you twisted from, like you converted from a negative to a positive. Okay. um how do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? I've seen that one, those types of questions before. So it might be like, what do you see yourself after residency? Where do you see yourself practicing as an attending? It might be in that form versus like literal 5 to 10 years. Either way, have a thoughtful response. You should be looking ahead. So yeah, you're looking ahead to get to residency. Look beyond that. Ask yourself, what kind of physician do you want to be? They're going to ask you that question. Okay. Some miscellaneous. This is like low yield, but again, just I had this question where one of y'all asked me like any unusual questions that you've been asked before, or you've heard about asked before from other people. So I've kind of practiced on some of you this type of question. So if you were a fruit or a biological cell or a food, which one would you be and why? And again, it's just one of those like lighthearted questions. It's like not really, it's not going to make or break your interview. It really is kind of like an icebreaker, and just to laugh at. But at the same time, you should have something thoughtful, because this is an opportunity to impress, right? Because if you had something thoughtful like, hey, like I'm a banana because I'm sweet and I like the color yellow or whatever, like whatever it is that your response is, should you can dish back the humor a little bit, a little lighthearted humor, a little levity, but a little bit of thoughtfulness just to show what your personality is. Okay, some of these TED Talk might, or if you had a podcast, what would you talk about? Or if you had what would be like one of the first interesting topics that you would teach as a resident or teach as an attending? What's the last book that you've read? Again, all of these are just kind of like on the icebreaker realm, but they still have value to them, and you should still be prepared for it, right? So questions to ask residencies. So I kind of alluded to this already. Again, how many times have I told you already to research your program? You can find this stuff on the website, but then what kind of mentoring programs, what kind of strains? One thing I do like to ask is, if you're talking to the program director or associate program directors, is like, what are some plans for improvement? What kind of things do you have planned out for improvement? coming up. It's kind of like a indirect way to say like, what are your weaknesses, right? Like when we want to ask them, you know, what things would you wish you could change, something like that, right? Like some things that you wish you could improve on in your particular program, because that way you can get sometimes a thoughtful response from the PD or the APD. It's telling you things like, hey, yeah, we struggle with this one thing, we struggle with research, but we're working on it. So that you can always get some information that way. Okay. Okay, so that's kind of what I have. I have a document if you want. I can send it to you with a lot more questions, a lot more detailed questions, and I want to know what questions you have for me. So I'll post. This is your time to like write it in the chat box. I will post some of the ones that I got from all y'all when you were signing up for this. So for internal medicine, should you say if you want to specialize or not? I think that question depends, right? Because if you are not certain, if they ask you, then you can mention it. If you're not absolutely certain, may not be beneficial, right? If it's something like there's a fellowship in that program that you really are going for, um, you should bring it up. You should be as honest as possible as for when it comes to that type of goals. They're going to ask you like, where do you see yourself after residency? So if you say I really want to go into cardiology, maybe you want to go into their cardiology program. So, asking questions about like, do you take in house, or what can a resident do to increase your chances for fellowship might be fair questions. Why this X program? So how to not make it generic. Again, do your research, right? So like, if you say something like, I want to come to this program because you are in an urban area and you have a diverse patient population, like, dude, they've heard that over and over again, right? But if you say something like, yeah, I've noticed that you do this X plus Y, setup, and this is new, or you do a lot more outpatient rotations, and I really want to do outpatient medicine, something to show that you did your research is going to make it feel less generic. Okay. What do they really want to know when they're prompt? Tell me about yourself. So I gave you a chance to think about it. It's going to be a mix of, and I already said this already, but it's going to be a mix of your personality and the medicine. And I think that most students talk about the medicine part. So if somebody asks you, if you asked me that question and I only just talked about my medicine, you really didn't get to know who I am as a person. And that's the same thing. They're trying to get to know who you are as a person, but then it's a balance, right? Like you can't just talk about who you are as a person. Let's talk about like, what qualities you have, what strengths do you have, and try to make it natural. Like, I love serving the underserved, and I love volunteering. Whatever it is, like whatever 2 or 3 qualities about you that you really want to highlight in 15 to 20 seconds, that's all you get. So make it count. And what kind of things are worth mentioning versus not so much? So worth mentioning are again like things that highlight your strengths. So or neutral things like just telling about where you're from. So you can make it, I'm from Chicago, I'm from Kansas City, I'm from this, I'm from that. Like, telling a little bit about your upbringing. I grew up with these many people, or I did, this is the type of lifestyle I am an avid. Maybe some hobbies that you really like. Again, that sets you apart. Maybe uh, you're a big time fisher. You love fishing, or you love camping, or you love outdoors, or you love traveling, or whatever. Be specific. Like if you just say I like traveling, tell us the last trip that you went on. I just recently came back from Europe, or whatever. Went to Europe recently. Again, these are just opportunities for your interviewer to break the ice a little bit in the beginning, and then again try to convert some of those qualities into something that would translate into medicine. Okay. Our interviews closed or open file typically. They're usually open file, I believe. To my understanding, I don't know that answer 100%. So every program probably does something a little different. But these people are usually like, they know your name. They have a picture of your face. They are, um, you know, sometimes they do know your information, and I think sometimes they only know a little bit about you. I don't think they know everything about you. So just be on the side that you may have to repeat things that do come up, like, you want to come to this program because you're from this area. Maybe they don't know you're from the area, right? Like, just again, maybe take an unassuming approach when you're answering their questions. Don't assume that they know everything about you on your file. What kind of patient cases are best to prepare in advance? So patient cases, we were kind of alluding to this. So it could be medically interesting. I personally think medically interesting is kind of easy. I don't get much out of it if I'm interviewing you for that information. I like the difficult cases, right? Like, were they difficult on you? Was the patient difficult? Family difficult? Colleagues were difficult? Something, right? So it could be like a really, really sick patient. Family was upset about their care. It could be difficult patients, like I alluded to before, like noncompliance, malingering, pain seeking, that may have looked that way, but they're actually not. That's what I want you to really emphasize, is that taking that unassuming approach, they want to see that. So I think those are better than maybe something that's just purely medically interesting. Like the patient's, super nice and kind, and you didn't have any issues with your colleagues, and it was just like a really rare case of something. I don't know how much value I get from that if you know what I mean, if anybody's, whoever asking this question. But it should be something that you learn from. I think that, like, again, it should demonstrate growth. Like, it should have made you stronger. It should have made you a better clinician. It should have made you better in your humanistic and your personal skills. So, what's an appropriate way to ask residency wellness? So, this is an interesting question. So, I was researching this. If you go on ACGME, they usually have like, if you Google ACGME or go on their website, they should have a section for this where they have updates on residency or resident like wellness. And it's still 80 hours a week. They shouldn't go past that. So all programs now are ACGME certified. There's no like DO programs or MD programs. We're all just under the same umbrella. So they all should be 80, but they do promote flexibility. That's the thing that I learned. So what does that mean? So you may be able to ask that question, right? So like, I noticed that 80 hours is still the limit, but ACGME is also emphasizing on flexibility and, situational based reasoning, right? So like maybe you have a patient that came to the door and you were on your 80th hour and you had to stabilize that patient and you went above to 81, right? No harm, no foul. Like, is that what they're talking about, flexibility? So like, versus what does flexibility mean to that program? So maybe that's an important question to ask. Inpatient caps, there usually are caps, should be caps. So ACGME, like usually for interns, there's a different cap for like second years and third years. So I think it's like 10 max for first years, and then something like, I forgot, 16 to 20 max for like if you're overseeing and you're not directly, if you're like overseeing 2 interns or something like that. Just again, do your research. You can figure this stuff out online pretty easily. But like I said, from the research that I did, 80 hours is still supposed to be the limit, but it sounds to me that that limit is not like firm. It kind of depends on the circumstances. So, what are some unique questions that you've heard of? I told you, like, these questions, like, again, what's the last book that you've read? If you like to travel, tell me about, like, what's the last place you did? We just want to know about you. We just want to know a little bit about who you are, and it's got to be a little bit of a mix, right? Who you are and how you grew from that experience. I didn't mention this, but your CV, everything on your CV is fair game. So those types of questions, like, again, that's why I think it's going to be more open folder versus like or open file versus closed file, because they might look at your file and be like, hey, I noticed that you volunteered at this clinic, tell me about it. That they will just ask you straight up like that, just tell me about it. Again, have a thoughtful response, like, I loved that experience because of X, Y, and Z. And I can remember this one particular patient that I worked with, and we were able to get her the care that she needed, and she came from underserved area and she had no money, and whatever your story is, just be able to let it come off the cuff pretty nice, like, nicely, concisely, genuinely. Okay. What are some unique, okay, so I said that, just seeking general advice. Okay. Any advice on dual applicants? So dual applicants, like, for example, if you are applying for anesthesia and backup in internal medicine, or maybe you're doing EM and family or whatever, again, you just have to be ready for those questions in different interviews. You might have an interview for EM on Monday, and then you have your another interview for family on Wednesday. Just don't mix up your responses, right? So just be well rehearsed, and I think that comes with practice. And if you are doing dual applications, it's going to be a little bit tougher for you. That's just the truth. But if you keep things organized, uh, your responses again probably should be very similar, right? Like I think you're just going to say like I love EM because of this, but I also love, like you also love family because of this, a lot of the similar reasons, right? Maybe it's the same type of patient population, or maybe you get to do procedures, or maybe you want whatever your things are. They're still your truths, but you just have to highlight certain things for EM and certain things for family. So, how to avoid cliche answers to common questions. We want to know who you are as a person. This is a very unusual feeling for a fourth year medical student because the first 3 years of your career, probably nobody was asking you these questions. They really want to know who you are as a person. So if you want it to become more genuine and less generic and less cliche, bring your personality into it, bring your personal experiences into it. Okay. Feel a little uncomfortable talking about some of these experiences, especially if it doesn't, like maybe you grew from it and it showed a weakness, right? Maybe you're like, hey, I did not expect this, but it opened up my eyes, and I became a better clinician for it. That's how I see, like when I'm looking, I want to know who you are. And think about it. You have thousands of applicants applying to the same residency. You have hundreds of interviewees. You're gonna blend in if you don't make it personal, and if you don't make it memorable. Like if you keep saying like the same rehearsed monotonous type of answers that we've heard before, which I gave you examples like generic responses, um, broad statements, like things that would be applicable to multiple residencies, not for that particular residency. Or if you have qualities that are again broad generic qualities and not your own qualities that you're proud of having, right? Like that you personally accomplished to get to those qualities, right? How to effectively answer the most common questions asked. So we kind of talked about, tell me about yourself, why that specialty. So tell me a time that you failed. Again, this is going to come from growth. If you remember anything, it's growth. A lot of these questions, growth, right? I like tell me about your CV experience, this experience here, or tell me about your mission trip to Ecuador. Tell me about your that one volunteering thing that you had. Tell me about your teaching experience when you were tutoring these students. There's growth, right? Like you should have became better from that experience. If it's something like, yeah, that was fun, I liked it, don't know much more about you after that answer, right? So we talked about do's and don'ts. Again, this is not. It's gonna feel kind of like personable, right? Like comfortable. They're asking you chit chat questions. They're asking you small talk. Always just have like your guards up because they're trying to get you comfortable because then they're going to ask you some once they ask you a difficult question they may catch you off guard. So just kind of always be on your toes with these questions. Don't get too comfortable. Don't call people by their first names. Like even if they introduce themselves by their first names, know your interviewer as much as you possibly can. You won't know until you probably the day of, but uh, know them, remember them, know their qualities. You never know when that could come back to help you later. How to rank programs. So this is going to come later. This is going to be like in January, February, and this you'll be thinking about it and mentally preparing for it before that, especially after each and every interview. So for example, interview one, you're going to be like, yeah, that interview was okay. Excuse me. Interview two, you're like, oh, that interview was great. I love that program. So that's going to go above interview one. And then three is going to be like, that was so to that. So you're going to be doing this. You're going to be doing this kind of mentally throughout. Keep your thoughts organized. So I would say even throughout this interview residency, the season that's coming soon. Um, if not, if some of you have already had some interviews like on your auditions, uh, write your personal experience on that, like on an Excel sheet or whatever. Just keep everything organized because you'll be surprised like how easily you're going to mix things up when you go from your first interview, but then to your fifth interview, sixth interview, 10th interview, 15th interview, right? Depending on who you are, like how many interviews you get, even after like the fifth or sixth one, things start to get mixed up. So I think you should keep yourself organized. Immediately write it like a diary. Like, what was your feeling after going to that interview? Like, what did you learn from that interview? Pros and cons. Okay. How to approach social events. I messed this up. So, how to approach social events and how to tell anecdotes quickly and succinctly. So again, this comes from, I don't know why this is doing this. Um, this comes from practice. So if you practice those stories and you have told those stories to someone, practice them with your family, your friends, your loved ones, colleagues, classmates, whoever you can confide in. Practice your stories with each other and see if it comes off naturally. Okay. What advice do you have when answering behavioral situation? We talked about that. Okay. And I think that is it. So any questions, any last minute questions do you guys have? I mean, not even last minute. I have plenty of time, so just let me know. Okay, so Dan's asking, is there a particular way you recommend taking notes during interview day, especially when it's remote? That's a great question. Okay, like should I be clearly be writing down notes on paper in front of the camera, simply typing on the computer? I would write notes on paper. I think typing can get a little distracting because you can imagine like the clicking of your keyboard. If I'm doing it like this, it could be very distracting. So I would probably have a notepad next in front of you and try to get used to writing without looking, right? So like if you're just buried, kind of like what we talk about when you're interviewing patients, right? If you're so buried in your notes and you're not making eye contact when somebody's talking to you, they're gonna make it. It's gonna appear as if you're not listening, even though you are. Try to chicken scratch your notes. Try to practice writing without looking, that sort of thing. How often have you heard the MMI style questions where they give us a clinical scenario and ask us how we would handle it? Tell me what MMI stands for again. I think I know what you're talking about.
I don't exactly remember what it stands for, but I know like applying to medical school that they would ask some of those questions, just kind of um like a patient asks you like if they're dying or like how would you answer that or something like that, where they give you like a full patient experience or something, and then you like say how you would address it.
Yeah, they might give you a scenario. I usually see it not them asking a specific scenario. That's usually like med school. Med school asks you, oh, this patient had this problem. What are you going to do about it? I don't see that as often. I think from again, this is like from my own experience. It's usually they ask you to talk about a patient where you get that same information. Um, Either way, they're gonna the way the interviews usually start, they always start off with like open-ended questions, tell me about yourself, lighthearted questions, and then they're gonna start transitioning into some of these more difficult questions. Regardless of what the question is, just be ready for the difficult ones. The difficult ones are going to be like, okay, if you had a patient that was couldn't afford their medication, what are you going to do about it? Like, you should have something thoughtful, right? Like, you know, again, if you say rambling and I don't know or what, like that's a no-no, right? So if they give you, okay, you have a patient who appears to be malingering, and again, that's a trap, right? Because how do you know they're malingering? How do you know that they're pain seeking or whatever? You know, try to they're trying to see how you would respond, because if you're like, yeah, I've had several patients like this, um, they're always up to no good, yada yada, whatever, right? Like that's wrong. That's a no no. They want to see your unassuming approach, giving benefit of the doubt to patients, because you again, I'm trust me, this is the reality, is that nobody does like very few people do this. Like we assume too much, we assume about others, and we don't take the time to really get to know one another, whether it's the patient, colleagues, etc. um, you should be unassuming in your approach. And again, a lot of these questions where they give you a clinical scenario are going to highlight something like that. So it sounds like you guys are saying mini med school interview. Okay. Yeah. So I don't think they're going to ask you direct, like, like a, oh, if you had this type of patient, but they might. Again, I can't, I'm not going to guarantee that they won't, but they probably will ask you to come up with something. So like, tell me about a patient where you had a difficult scenario. All right. Daryl asked, when asking the tell us about yourself question, is it absolutely necessary to talk about the medicine portion? My initial thought was telling them about me since my application is about practicing medicine and maybe they ask why our specialty. Yeah. Okay. So, fair, right? Like, again, when I say like, I want to know who you are as a person, I don't want it to be, I think most students will talk too much about the medicine part. So if you learned anything from that, talk more about yourself. Okay. It's okay to talk a little bit about the medicine part. Like, I'm looking, maybe your personality fuses really well with specialty. So if you love family medicine and you're like, I love, um, I grew up in a big family in a big community where everybody knew each other, and you had next door neighbor giving you a cup of sugar, that sort of thing, right? And family medicine is something that uh, is synonymous to the way that I live. That's what I mean when I say like talk about yourself, but let it come back to medicine in some form. So I think it shouldn't be like, you know, I'm I love this, and I love cooking, and I love long walks on the beach, and it's like, and it just ends there, fizzles there. It should be like something that connects to why you're there interviewing in the first place. Would it be all right to describe a part of me that implies my motivation for medicine? Exactly, absolutely. That's what I mean. So part of it should be qualities about you. It could be qualities that are universal, right? You start off universal qualities, like maybe you love the outdoors, maybe you love people, you love family, you love cooking, you love traveling. These might be more universal. You love music, but again, try to find a way to get it back to medicine. Okay, but like I said, you only have like, try not to ramble on too much. 15, 20 seconds for that response. Elevator pitch. Work on that. I'm telling you that that is going to be the first question that you get asked, and it not to put pressure on you, but it really does, carry on for the rest of the interview. That first impression they have about you. So if it comes off nice, you've been working on that answer for a long time and it comes off really well, highlights who you are as a person, comes off genuine, the rest of your interview is going to go much more smoothly. Okay, what else? Again, I'm here for you. Like, whatever questions you have, and I hope this was helpful, right? Like, I hope you learned something. I really do, and otherwise I wouldn't be doing this. I'm um I'm offering, if you want one on one, I do mock interviews. I do two mock interviews, and the first one usually goes not so great, and we learn so much from that first interview. So I'll highlight what things you did right, what things we can work on, and usually record those interviews so you can see them yourself, and we can compare and contrast from the first one to the second one. So again, if you're interested in that, let me know. Anything else? And let me know if if you felt like this was good. Give me some thumbs ups. Just let me know if this was helpful.
For the question about conflict with like a colleague or something, I know you said it's about like growth mindset, but what if there's nothing that like stands out as like a major issue? Like how do you like what advice do you have for like kind of coming up with something to answer that question?
When you talk about a colleague who might be difficult, is that what you're implying?
Yeah, or like a conflict where you didn't agree with someone or something like that.
So are you saying that like if you don't have a good story, is that what you're talking about? Or like,
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
like if there was never like a huge conflict or anything with someone, like are there smaller examples of something? Or I know one could be like if you disagree with like their diagnosis, like you listen to them and like I try to understand their th thought process, but like is there another kind of example like that you could use?
Yeah, I think, if you think about it, you will see that there's plenty of conflict. There are examples of like a doctor who was malignant, right? Like, attending was yelling at you left and right, or you had um, somebody who said something disrespectful to you, right? It could have been like, unintentional. You know, I have, like, for example, for me, like I have older patients, older colleagues who kind of talk a certain way, and I'm sure you get what I'm trying to say when I say that. And the language that they use is it was common during their time, but it's not common now, and so that type of stuff is fair game, right? Like, how did you come across someone who assumed you were a nurse when you're actually the medical student? Or this happens a lot with women in medicine. Um, you know, walking into the room, they assume that you might be somebody else, and so like that probably has happened to to a fair number of you all the time. It could be a colleague, like a student who was you probably have had this where you had somebody who was a go-getter, answering all the questions, coming prepared. Wasn't you never got a chance to really showcase who you are. Like that happens all the time. So like, how did you overcome that? So I can go on and on. There's so many easy ones, like again, like if somebody's late, if you had to cover for someone, if there was I had this before where one of your previous classmates who was graduated already, who um, they were going from patient room to patient room, and the residents had this tendency to make like particular remarks after leaving certain patients' rooms. Right? Like saying negative things about a patient. Like how do you handle that type of situation? Right? So these are, if you think about it, trust me, there are plenty of scenarios where it's either a medical student, a resident, a attending, a nurse, um, somebody in the house staff that you had and it doesn't have to be big, right? Like, again, just how did you grow from it? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that was helpful. I think I was thinking more like larger scale. But is it like appropriate like for the thing about like the attending like being rude to you? Like is that okay? I know like with trying to like not talk bad about somebody.
Yeah,
Is
if you
that
say it the right way, right? Like if you say like the attending was, I had a difficult time with this particular attending, um, and again, try to be. You're not like like just destroying them while you're talking about them. It's just like you can allude, and people understand pretty quickly. You don't have to like describe every single detail, but you can just be like, I had a difficult situation with an attending who um, either said cruel things or whatever, like, and how did you overcome that, right? Like if you um, did it make you stronger? Did you ignore it? Did you talk to the attending and like find a more tasteful approach to start that conversation versus like, they don't want to hear like, oh, you completely avoided that conversation until the rotation was over, right? um, there's a right way of saying it. So again, you don't have to badmouth that attending, but you can say something like, I worked with an attending who was a little bit difficult to work with, and most people, that's a very common scenario to be in. All right, Andrea said, is it okay to talk about things that occurred before medical school for answering behavioral questions? You can, but it's just like, you had 4 years to grow from that experience, right? So it should be something on your rotations, I would say. I would say that medical school is probably like, it's fair game, but I don't. Again, just think about it. Like if you heard me say it, if I was the medical student and you're the interviewer, and I talked about something that didn't happen in medical school, how much did that really help you? Like in knowing who I am. Again, like if we learn anything about the theme of these interviews, it's like they want to know how you've grown over the years. And if it's something from before medical school, we don't get that information. These are really good questions. You guys, I'm really, grateful. And if there are any other questions, you have my information. You can email me. And again, feel free. Like if you're interested in signing up, let me know. Or if you want to learn more, let me know. If you have recordings and you want to send them my way, I'll give you some pointers. I can tell you like what I like about it, or if it's good or if it's not great. So if you want to send like, you know, like an audio recording or video recording, I can give you little tips on what you're doing right. Okay. All
I have
right.
one more question
Yeah.
for you, if
Go.
that's okay.
Absolutely.
Are there any like cliche weaknesses that you would say stay away from?
Yeah, like if you say something like, "Oh, I work too hard," of course that's super cliche, right? Like it should be something like genuine. It should be something that you really do have a weakness in, and then you probably have worked on, right? Like maybe your presentation skills were not the best, or maybe you didn't know how to talk to certain patients or certain colleagues, right? But again, it should always convert to something of growth, of evolution. And I think cliche would be like, again, like a lot of students might use like weaknesses, right? Like quote weaknesses that are actually like strong qualities. Like again, I work too hard. I'm always in the hospital. One of my weaknesses is I love patients too much. Like, nobody believes that, right? Like nobody, you're not gonna have your interviewer believe that. And again, even if that's true, it doesn't like show what they're looking for. Like we're all human beings. We all have weaknesses. I have weaknesses, right? Like I have tendencies that I make. Like every patient encounter that I have still to this day, I think about the ones that I wish I could have had better, encounters with. And I'm not even talking about the medicine. I'm talking about like just the personal encounter. Like maybe I rubbed a patient the wrong way, and like I said something the wrong way, and I'm like, man, I wish I said it differently. And I, that, these are things that we are constantly working on. So there has to be something more personal. What else? Keep them coming. Anything else? Like I said, I'm if you want to hang out more, you can. If you want to tell me what's going on with your life, let me know how things are going. You can. Um, but either way, I think this should have been an overall good overview for what to do. In summary, be prepared. Have those questions, and I hesitantly say rehearse. Right, rehearse is the first layer. You got to rehearse your answers, practice your answers. It shouldn't come off rehearse. So there's a second layer. So you got to practice that, so that you may be typing your answers on a Word doc or whatever, and if you're reading off of it, it's gonna come off like that. We can tell, absolutely can tell, when something feels scripted and when something feels more genuine. And that's what I mean. Like if you didn't learn anything today, it's like practice. It's going to make you better. Record yourself audio, record yourself video, put on your suit, put on your business attire, and get into that mindset now, because and see how you look, how you come across recording, because you'd be surprised. I'm telling you, I've done it before, and it's like, what was I thinking when I said this answer, right? Or what was I doing? Why was I? You starting to notice ticks, right? You start to notice different tendencies that you have. Saying or is very common, but like looking this way, or slouching, or saying a particular word too many times. I've seen that too, right? Like it can be a little distracting when you say the word like, or if you say the word stupid a lot, and you're like, what? I can't believe I keep saying that. That's what I'm saying. Record yourself, practice. I can give you guys those questions if you ask for, if you remind me. Like I have a list of much more detailed questions than the ones that I came up with. Those are the main ones. Those are the main ones that, I think if you do well, tell me about yourself. Why the specialty? Why do you care about our program? Why should we care about you? The difficult behavioral questions. If you can handle those questions, you're in a good place. I wouldn't say you're gonna knock the interview out of the park, but that's the foundation of your interview, or those questions. Cool. All right. I think this seems like this is the end. So, again, reach out. Let me know if you have any questions. If you want to sign up with me, I would highly recommend signing up soon, because these next couple of weeks I'm free and we can really work on your skills, especially if you feel like you're weak on getting your people person skills out. Okay. But have a great rest of your night, and thank you for coming on.